Hi everyone, and welcome to tonight's movie hangout, where we'll be discussing the Danish TV series Borgen. For those who haven't watched it yet, this is an European series telling us the day-to-day life of a woman prime minister in Denmark, about the corridors of power, the media industry, and the family challenges that the prime minister faces. With us, we have our guests based in Sweden, but originally from Denmark, Anna.
Hi everyone.
And we have Mikey from Belgium, but currently living in South Africa.
Hi.
So, let us first start by bringing this TV series to our own lives and analyze the impact and the lessons that we can learn from it. Then we will also analyze the educational aspect of the series in regards to the political game. So, to start off, I'm going to ask you, Mikey, how did this series support yourself in your own process, and why?
Well, for me, I was never interested in politics at all. And even though I studied politics at a university because I understood that it's important, I couldn't connect to it. Like I could intellectually understand it, I understood the words, how it works as a concept. But what the series allowed me to do was to see it in action, kind of. So it became more concrete, and I could kind of start relating to it, being able to connect one thing with the other. Oh, this is what Parliament is. Oh, now they're doing that. Oh, I know what this is. Okay. And then you kind of start, it kind of bridges the gap between me and what happens in politics. Also because all the characters are displayed in a very humane manner. You get to know the people in the series, so they're not just a politician, some person out there that you don't know and you only see once in a while when they're being interviewed by the media. So it kind of bridges that gap between who am I as a person living in a country and who are the politicians, what do they do, what is my relationship to them, and from that perspective I found it very supportive to watch this show.
Cool, Mikey. Yes, I can definitely relate to that, and I could also add that for me it was a point of like understanding how it works, because often we fear what we don't understand, and then it's common that you fear politics because it's kind of sometimes it's associated with a dirty game. But once you kind of understand it, then the fear fades away, and that I found it was supportive in my own process. And just before we go on to the second question of the evening, I am also going to invite all the participants, if you wish to ask a question during the live hangout, you can do so by opening the Q&A app and then type your questions and we'll address it as soon as we can. So now I'm going to go now turning on to the topic of the women, like having a woman as the main character and the whole expression throughout the film, the series. So Anna, for example, for you, how, and within our own process of redefining words, what have you learned or discovered within you in relation to, for instance, the words power and ambition that in the series is represented by this woman?
Well, I wouldn't say that I specifically through this series have worked with the word power or ambition in myself. When I did watch it, I watched it quite some time ago because it aired on Danish television a couple of years back, or the last series or the last season was actually quite recently. I think it was last year. But the main character in the series is the Prime Minister Birgitte Nyborg, and she's quite a complex character, like Maite is saying, you know, that she's a real human being. So unlike in a lot of other movies and series that kind of have a female lead character being some sort of like superhero, for example, she's very relatable and she's very human. So in a kind of almost a little bit of a stereotypical kind of way, it it makes you as a woman, or it can give you as a woman the possibility that, I mean, if she could do something like that, then surely I could. And then something that you also see in the series, or that I noticed in the series, is how she, in instances, she actually relies on feminine qualities within herself, or like typically feminine qualities. And that's quite refreshing to see, you know, because otherwise in movies, and we discussed this also when we did Game of Thrones, in relation to how females are represented, it's like when females get into power, they tend to just be just like males, and then that becomes the ideal of ambition or of power, for example, or the females that we see in news that are in such position. But in this series, you get someone that is very relatable, that in many ways is just like you and me, and that I find that quite cool, because it makes it more genuine, instead of some ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. I can completely agree with that. And I also noticed that within me, it empowers oneself because you see it there, and it allows you to, why not, experimenting. And at some point, for example, in her first speech, she was actually talking about how she was going against the rules because she wasn't dressed as her spin doctor said, just because she got fat, so she wouldn't dress those clothes. So it actually brings down the standard citizen, which is not below politics, but is just equal to it. So, Maite, would you like to give us your perspective? And you, also as a woman, what did you learn from her?
Yeah, that speech I think was very refreshing, in how she just said, okay, look, this is what I'm experiencing, this is where I'm at, this is I'm wearing this dress, placing herself also equal to everyone that was watching the show, which I think was very important in terms of why she did so well, or why the ratings were so great after she did that speech. And that is something definitely that is lacking in our current society. There's a lot of attention being spent on how things are presented, what things look like, but there's like a barrier that's been created, and you don't actually get to know who are those people that we're voting for, and even within our own relations, people we work with, people in supermarkets. We spend a lot of time thinking about, what do I look like, how should I act, how should I behave, should I wear these shoes, this handbag, all placing focus on an image and how I want people to see me. But it creates a barrier where we cannot really relate to people easily, because all we see is this image, and now we have an idea of who this person is, and well, then you immediately go reflecting back to you, like, well, can I relate to this image, or can I relate to this person based on what they're presenting? When most of the time, if we look at ourselves, we know that we like to change what we look like, trying to kind of hide things of ourselves, things we don't like, and we try and compensate for that in how we look, or placing the focus on our legs or on our hair instead. So it all kind of stands in the way of being able to really connect to people, because you're trying to take out of the picture all the things that actually are a part of you, and then you also don't see it in other people. So that point in the show was very refreshing, not only in terms of politics, but in terms of our society as a whole, where if we would actually speak to people, which I have experienced, where you go, okay, let's just drop the act. This is what I actually experience day in, day out. This is the kind of anxieties I have. And if people speak on a level like that to each other, no matter which country they're from, no matter which background they have, you can relate to people very easily. It's like we all kind of experience the same things, but we don't talk about it. It's such a shame, So we should have more of that in our society.
Yeah,
That's
it's like that speech especially it satisfies a desire or a need within all of us for politicians to be real. It's all so fake and everyone knows it, and they're just speaking these speeches that someone else has written. So it's like in that moment she's actually doing something that we would all wish that we could do, but especially also that we would like the politicians to do. Be real, speak truth with us instead of all that fake speeches.
absolutely. I completely agree. And I noticed when I was watching that speech, it actually changed my perspective. Like, oh, actually, if you're in politics, you don't have to have a double life. Or in everything you do, you can, of course, you have your responsibilities, but there are certain things that it's, like she said, it is who we are. And that is a point of equality that we all face. And bringing that now back to our process, the DesteniIProcess, at least from my perspective, when I was watching this series a few months ago, I was also walking already the DesteniIProcess. And some of the points I could only understand and kind of realize within me because I was working the self-forgiveness. I was working those points within me. So in that case, can you tell me and expand a little bit more, how have the Destiny tools helped you to work on yourself? So when those points come up, like for example, when you were saying, Mighty, that we think so much about what other people think of us, and we care more about that than what we are actually talking, how have the tools of Destiny helped you to work those points within you?
Well, mostly I found that it's a matter of confidence, where if I'm not confident about myself or the things I stand for, what I'm committed to, then I feel that who I am is not enough, and then I try to present myself as someone different. And definitely, not only the Destiny tools, but also the Destiny support platforms that are available, like the forum, especially the forum, was a great support because, everyone who comes there makes an agreement that this is a place where we're going to support ourselves. There's no judgment allowed. Each one can be honest with themselves, and then it's discussed. It's shared with each other. And there, for the first time, I realized, oh my God, I'm not the only person who experiences these things. There's all these other people, and they experience the exact same thing as me. Oh my God, I'm not alone. Where before, I would never talk to anyone about what I think, what I really think. I would share maybe an opinion or an idea, but I wasn't going to share what I really think with people. That was secret. So going on the forum and then having that safe place where you are now invited to go and really investigate your thoughts, write them down. If you're comfortable, share it. That was great. That was really the point for me that allowed me to really commit to this process. Yeah.
Cool, Mighty. And after this hangout, we will definitely place the link to the forum on the description so people can also access it and discover. And we had a few comments just before we go to the next question. We had David Robertson just replied, and yes, we are live at the moment, so we can read your questions. And his comment was that this series showed a fine example of how an honest and true woman can make so much difference to the world. So thank you for your comment. We just discussed about that, and it is that kind of examples that we need not only to see in our society, but also to become in our own lives. Anna, would you like to add something to it?
Well, I would like to add that in Denmark, well, you know what is really interesting? Because I'm from Denmark, so when I watch such a series as this one, I couldn't help but compare it to the real Danish political system. And a lot of the things that they talk about or the characters are very, like they've changed the names of.
Oops. I think we just, Anna, your line just broke for a moment.
A female prime minister.
Anna, wait a second. I don't know if it was only on my end, but we missed a little bit of your presentation. Can you just restart, please?
Okay, so the question was about, or the comment was about, that it's refreshing to see females. Was it that?
Yes, absolutely, yes. The true woman in our society and how it can change the world.
Yeah, okay. So what is interesting is that in real politics in Denmark, there is a female prime minister. And while I do not no longer live in Denmark, I do see, for example, her speeches and stuff like that. And she's very similar to Hillary Clinton, for example, in how she presents herself. And there's been like a lot of controversy, you know. She cannot get too emotional. She cannot get too cold. Like, she's always criticized for the way that she appears. And, you know, the newspapers, they comment on what handbag she has and stuff like they would never do with a man. But then in Borgen, it's like a kind of an ideal scenario in a way. Obviously, there's also some issues with her being female in that series, but it's kind of like taken to, in a way, how it should be, or how it could be, like the potential of what is possible. But unfortunately, at the moment, it's only possible in fiction, which is really sad. Because I'm not sure that a person would be able to do that right now, the way that the political system is constructed and the way that we relate to females in power, for example. So in a way, it's actually really cool to make such television and to explore the potential of what is possible. Like, what would happen if we were real? What would happen if a woman in power would, you know, instead of trying to become like a man, not that there's anything wrong with masculine qualities either, but it's that like idea of power and how you have to be ruthless and cynical, and you know, that a lot of men even, you know, have to live up to. So by exploring that in this series, you actually get a really refreshing perspective on how it could be like if people would allow themselves to be real and use their unique and individual qualities, because that's what she does. And I will also add, which is very interesting, is that the actress who plays Birgitte Nyborg, she is actually very similar in all of her movies and in all of her series. So that's kind of a different meta perspective, is that her individuality is even coming through into the character. So there is actually something real within it, because that's an expression that comes through in all her movies, from my perspective at least, that there's always this very distinct sense of authenticity, that this is a real person, which is fascinating.
Cool, Anna. Thank you so much for that input. That's really good to have like input from Denmark, because we're not there, but it's good. And still related to that, so for example, there was this, there has been claimed that Borgen series had affected Danish politics, and then the director was asked if that has not been the other way around, where Danish politics influenced the series, but actually that was not so. So from your perspective, have the Danish society, did you see any difference after or during the series, so that politics try to kind of replicate the good things, the good practices that were showed in the series, which is also a good thing for other countries to learn from, right?
No. Unfortunately not, or not that I'm aware of, but there was actually a lot of debate about it. And as you say, the director, Adam Price, he went out and said in an interview that he didn't write it, you know, in like simulating the actual politics, that he actually thought that it had affected politics. I don't know. You know what I see is that the politicians, they don't dare, because we've constructed this like very, can you guys hear me? Yeah, we've constructed this like very artificial political system with spin doctors, and everything is so, you know, strategized, you know, from the hair and the handbag and the way that they speak. So I think that they're afraid of being real, which I would say is like the core of this series. It's what makes it so great, and is what makes you want to watch it. So I think it would be fantastic and interesting to see politicians that dare to be more real and express themselves.
Yes, and for example, when I was watching the series, I thought, well, this should definitely be streamed out in Portugal because we have so much to learn from it. I'm from Portugal, and I see that the politics there, it's still a very, like a closed system that only some people can go through if they are part of those youth clubs or youth parties, and it's very close. It's not like the standard citizen that comes from the roots and actually that cycles to work that will then go up and be in a position of power. So there is definitely, and I know that this series fortunately had a lot of success in Europe and in other countries as well. So, and for example, Mikey, you in South Africa, you said it has helped you to understand politics. So for you, from your, as you mentioned before, but in terms of your educational process of understanding politics, how would that affect, for example, in South Africa, if you had politicians that were actually true to themselves and they would be having common sense? And, for example, just bringing another element to the discussion is the idea of conflict of interest and how the main character, at some point, she kind of discouraged her husband from taking a certain position in a company because that will be a conflict of interest within the government. And this kind of decisions, you have to be quite clear in your own mind in terms of your objectives to not follow just the money and the profit making, but to actually be a very commonsensical human being. What is your perspective on that related to South Africa, for example?
Well, I would say, from as far as I've been able to follow what's happening in politics in South Africa, that there is no such thing as trying to avoid conflicts of interest. There is no clarity on what is the common good and what is self-interest. The two are very much intertwined at the moment. So the European political system, as how it is displayed in Borgen, which I'm not sure is actually how it is happening, but the ideals and the thought processes that are displayed within the series is nothing compared to how politics is done here in South Africa. Everything is very petty, and you don't feel like there is really any principles that anyone really stands for. You can hear words that are being spoken, but you kind of know that they are empty, and you know that the real motives of the people in politics are self-interest, are to further their own position in society and in life. So it's a very sad fact. But one thing that must be understood is that nothing's going to change unless someone's going to demand change. And currently no one actually cares or knows enough about what is happening to voice it and to place pressure on those in power to stop what they're doing, because, you know, to hold them accountable. No one is doing that. And what I found is that the series allowed me to start actually paying attention more to what is actually going on, what is the current discussions. Like I saw, I got an email from a newspaper I'm subscribed to, and it said something about one of the people in parliament being treated in this and this way while he was giving a speech. And I watched a video, and I could relate to where he was, what he was doing, based on my experience in watching Borgen and watching the show. And so from there I was fascinated, because I was, how do I say? I was really like focused and like, wow, this is happening right now. These people are saying these things to him, like, what is going on? What are the different powers? What is what are the dynamics that are happening right now in South Africa in politics that I actually don't know about? And I found it so that as to watch the show. And I just finished watching all 3 seasons, so I was very bummed out that there was nothing more that I could watch. And then I realized, but hey, wait a minute, I can just watch real life politics. Like, this is happening right now, and it's like gonna be happening forever. It's never gonna stop. So that was fascinating to actually experience that excitement and that intrigue about what is happening in politics, who are those people, what do they stand for, what are they trying to do, what are the strategies they are using, for what purpose, where are my interests being represented in all of this. And that is something that is completely missing in all of South Africa. People just don't know, and people just don't care. So from that perspective, these types of shows are very, very helpful in terms of how educational they are, in showing people, look, this is what happens in politics, and allowing them to relate to it and see what the problems are, and where citizens actually have a responsibility in keeping up to date, because when the time comes where you cast your vote, you shouldn't do it only based on their campaign. You should know everything that they have done in the past 4 years. And based on that, see, well, do these people actually follow through on commitments? Do they compromise? Things like that. And people don't know that. People just look at the campaign posters and say, okay, well, that looks good, I'll vote for that. So that's a shame. And unless we actually start following what's happening, there's no way it's going to change.
Yep. Anna, would you like to add something to it before we go to one of the questions we just received?
Yes, I would like to add that I read an interview with the writer, again, Adam Price, and he actually said exactly what you were saying, Maite, which is interesting, that this is why he created the show, is because he wasn't interested in politics, and then he was like, okay, let's make something that will make people interested in it. So that's quite cool. And then in relation to whether the show represents reality, I was completely blown away with how, because throughout my entire life I've been following Danish politics in the news and all these like fights between the politicians and the parties, and what I actually found it very representative. But what I didn't find representative, unfortunately, like I said before, was the main character and her integrity and her standing on principle and her willpower. Like, that was unfortunately at this point fictional until we, move ourselves into that position, as Maite was saying, because nothing is going to change until we start becoming that person. So, and then also, all the intrigue. I mean, the intrigue and the drama, because you have this thing where politics, it's about managing society, right? It's about laws and policies and statistics, but then you see this series and it's like 90% of it is like scheming and argumenting and winning over each other, and it's like, okay, that's quite insane that it is in that kind of environment that the decisions, the future of our country are being decided. So maybe we could explore that a bit deeper, because I find that quite disturbing.
Yes, it's absolutely, and we will discuss that now in the second part of the session. And just to add, so what we discovered from this series, that the key element, it is actually the individual. It's going back to the basics, like who is behind politics? It's us. Each one of us have the potential to become individuals of integrity and with principles. And that character is actually showing that. Obviously, it's not for real because it's fictional, but there's nothing actually stopping us from going into politics and bringing those values and those principles that is currently lacking. And maybe that's also the reason why people lack so much interest in politics, because it lost all of that. It became a business just like anything else. And even in business, there's so many things that must be changed so that we start really caring about ourselves. And I guess that this already answers a little bit to the question that we just received from Mike Clemmers. So he says that corporate becomes politics and politics becomes corporate. So if we study the system, we see what politics and political involvement stands for and asks of a person. So the question that he brings is, why is that Borgen as a series became so successful? So we have discussed this already, but if you want to add something to it before we move on.
Why it became so successful?
Yeah.
I think, like we've been discussing, I think it's the authenticity and the realness of it. And specifically because of the main character and what she actually as a person brings into the role. And then, as Maite has been saying, you know, it spikes the interest in politics. It opens up that world that some of us have, you know, already given up on. Like, yeah, what do I care? And that's actually quite, I would say that's actually quite a, like you were saying, Maite, an educational value.
Yeah, and one thing, for example, there's an ECOF interview. This is the live review of a president. And it was for me very supportive to see how has someone that became a president now actually understood the system much better by looking at, for example, the economic system and how its economy is so ingrained within politics. And this relationship that Mike Lammers were saying in terms of corporate and politics becoming like two sides of the same coin, and the lack of our understanding, and actually comes down to education. As Marty was saying, like we care so much about the colors on the posters and outdoors rather than actually the meaning of the words and what those politicians want to say about it and who's actually financing their political campaigns, all of that. So it is our responsibility as each one of us as citizens to start paying attention to that, to educating ourselves, and then to bring that into our political daily life. Maite, would you like to add anything to it, which we just discussed in terms of the business, and also, as I was saying about the live reviews, how has that also supported you to understand combining what the CAF interviews provide and what, for example, Borgen series was showing?
Yeah, I find if you want to have a clear understanding of something, you have to really consult various sources of education. Like, for instance, the Borgen series, I find it didn't very much emphasize the whole economic aspect of that is involved within politics, where she was very easily to say, well, I'm not going to have my policy be determined by some major corporate giant. That's not happening, and that was it. So in real life, I would imagine that's very different. In school, I was taught politics and I was taught economics, and then once in a while there was like a connection shown here and a connection shown there, but in real life that connection is there the whole time and determines the whole flow of events, if you want to call it that. So that is something you kind of have to start puzzling together and finding various sources, reading lots of books, watching many movies and documentaries to be able to see those things, because you'll only get certain perspectives in each of them. So yeah, definitely also consulting the ECOF interviews gives that additional perspective to be able to see what the relationships are, what is really involved, and be able to see more than what you did before.
Perfect. And I was now while we were discussing, I thought to myself, who politicians would be if they start applying self-forgiveness? So, because I noticed that in the series, Brigitte, the main character, she actually prepares herself in terms of before her speech or before communicating with her children. She used to take notes and already applying the tool of writing. But I thought, like, some of the emotions that potentially people in decision making and roles of power, how would they benefit from self-forgiveness? So let's now create some kind of a fiction here. And Anna, tell me, how do you think politicians would behave if they were to work on self-forgiveness before taking a decision or even before a speech?
Okay, so in Borgen, and probably most likely in reality, what we see and what is so disturbing is that we see the politicians making decisions out of spite, you know, out of envy towards another politician. And if you have a look, like any TV show, it's the same in Game of Thrones, for example. It's the same in Suits. Like, they're constantly very impulsively based on like instant like anger or jealousy or vengeance. And then of course, because Borgen is about politics, it very much becomes about power and about winning. And you know, in that they completely forget anything about principle. Like I was saying before, it's like it's 90% intrigue and drama and 5% principle. So if they were to apply self-forgiveness, if they were to clear their emotions and feelings, they could be stable, they could be physically here, practical, focusing on what matters, and it would be so much easier to actually make decisions that would benefit everyone.
That's great. Yeah, I want that to happen, Anna. So we can definitely we will add on the descriptions some links that will support our viewers to start self-forgiveness. And who knows, if a politician is watching us, they may learn something today. Maite, would you like to add something to it?
Well, in relation to the previous question and topic, I was actually thinking while I was watching the show, how do they do it to be in politics and have them go through all this intrigue and not apply self-forgiveness? It's like you must be driving yourself crazy. And also in terms of how it affected her relationship, how her children were experiencing themselves, all these things would be prevented or would be resolved if the principles of self-honesty and self-forgiveness and writing were applied. So definitely, I don't know how it is being done and why people keep doing it. But it would definitely change everything if politicians themselves would change and live by principle. Because also in the show, like Anna said, it's only 5% principle. And sometimes in the show, the main character would suddenly say, you know what, we haven't found a solution, but we have to go back to the principle. Like way at the end, after they've considered all their self-interest and how a decision would benefit themselves or would benefit the other party, right at the end they go, oh, wait a minute, if we just apply our principle, you know? So that should totally be reversed, where first the principle needs to be considered, and if personal interest points come up, they are, you know, they are directed, resolved, and it just doesn't interfere with the daily management of a nation.
Yep. And when you were asking how did they do it, what happens is, from what I see, is that they're just going to create consequence, not only to a country and to every single citizen, but then for themselves and for their own families. As we saw, the main character, she was suffering at some point from cancer, and she wasn't able to deal with that within herself, and so she wasn't able to deal that with her children. And actually on the season 2, and I'm sorry to spoil some of those that haven't watched it yet, but basically there's at some point her daughter is actually suffering from a lot of anxiety, and she has to go to the hospital, and all of that are things and are consequences that must be prevented by parents that are fully aware of what's going on first within themselves, so that they can then be able to help their children to understand what they go through and to open the discussion instead of having a secret agenda and actually lying to the children and saying that everything is okay when in fact it's not. And we can overcome that by investigating ourselves, by writing what's going on within us and applying self-forgiveness, and then commit ourselves to change the relationship with ourselves and to the people around us. And that was also going to happen in politics eventually when people start being aware of this consequence. So that's why, Margie, when we look at the world around us, it's just such a mess, and the relationship in politics of all those interests and the network, it's so complicated because that is actually a representation and a mirror of what's happening in our own lives. And until we not sort that out, that is going to be quite difficult to fix the problems in the world around us. Anna, would you like to? Did you think about anything else that you want to add to this point of like the mirror and the consequence of not applying, for example, the self-forgiveness and the self-honesty principle?
No, I was looking at this question that's come in.
Perfect. So let's go for it. So we have a question from Marlon, and the question is, isn't this show also perpetuating the idea of politics as some kind of reality show and a conflict of interests instead of principles? Is this confirming the idea that politics should mean conflict and a struggle? So Anna, what's your perspective on that?
Absolutely, and in the show, this is very, very well reflective of how politics is like in Denmark, where, you know, they will constantly go on TV, and like I said, there will be like articles upon articles about her handbag and like completely irrelevant things that has nothing to do with politics or with principles whatsoever. Like it really has become a reality show, but I'm not sure I would say that the show is perpetuating it. I would say you could also say that it is reflecting it or exposing it, but maybe in the way that it does it, that it's not so critical. It kind of becomes, you know, that we just accept it as normal. That, oh, okay, you know, it's normal to, for politicians, for example, they have these fights in the newspapers where one politician will write and then the other one will write, and it will become very personal and defaming, which completely takes the focus away from the actual points. And then the question that we could ask also is that whether that is actually the point, because people seem, you know, the citizens, the population seems to be more preoccupied with the celebrity of the politician than the actual issues. And I would say that that is something that is highly problematic.
Okay. Absolutely, Anna. Sorry, it's just because there was a big delay, so I wasn't sure if you had finished. That's why I took a little bit of time. And another point, so thank you, Marlon, for your question. And I don't have anything to add. Maite, would you like to add anything to Marlon's question?
Yes, actually, I found it also quite disturbing how politics is set up when there are several political parties and they each have their standpoint on a specific topic or an issue, and they don't want to discuss with each other what is actually the best, you know, for everyone involved. That question is not considered. They each have their opinion and they stand by their opinion, and now they're gonna try and either force their opinion to be implemented or try and create a majority with other political parties that kind of think similarly and then make compromises and concessions, and now some kind of policy is implemented. And very much there's that whole fight between political parties about who gets to decide, who has to be able to work with each other. And it kind of, I find when I was watching the show that it's very sad that this is how politics is, because it reflects how little we're able to communicate with each other as human beings, and how little we're able to work together, and how little we're able to put criticize our own ideas and opinions just for a moment, to be able to consider that maybe another person is making a point. And that also reflects back again in terms of how, if politicians would actually be applying the tools, they would realize and understand how their own opinions and their beliefs that they feel very strongly about were created through memories, through certain events, through reactions, through their parents, and not take them as seriously, not take them as a given, as though this is it and I cannot sway from this position. But actually look at the point and say, well, do I believe this? Why do I believe this? Do I really stand for that? Is that actually best for everyone? So from that perspective, yes, I definitely agree with what Marlon said in terms of the drama and the fighting, how that is a little bit perpetuated in terms of how it is seen as this is the only way we'll ever do politics. Like, this is the only way. But yes, so maybe another show should be made where a transition is made to a new political system, and how would that go, and what would it look like? That would be very interesting.
Oh, and if I can add something, an interesting note here is that there's
Matthew, your line was cutting a little bit. But
oh no, I could hear her, Joanna. Maite, can you hear Joanna?
No.
It's cutting a...
No, Joanna, it's on your end, unfortunately. Okay, so I will just say what I was going to say to you then, Maite, and to everyone watching, which is interesting that in recent years there's been a lot of party swapping in Danish politics, like really insane amount, where they will jump from the left and then they'll suddenly join the right, and some of them will even jump from party to party, and then they will of course say that, I've come to realize that these
and I wasn't able to hear what you were saying.
Joanna? Okay, so that they will jump from party to party, and then they will say that this is now my new principles, but what it kind of seems like they just want to try and go where the power is. Like they want to join that party that will maybe come into power next, so that it doesn't even have anything to do with ideals or politics, but it's just like they just want power. And then the other thing that has happened, which is apparently unprecedented in Danish politics, is that there is now, like right now, there are fewer parties, all the parties that isn't a part of the government at the moment, or the coalition, they don't want to be in government. They have said, no, we don't want to be a part of the government. I don't know if I've never heard about it before. But then that's quite fascinating, because if you're in politics and you think that your opinions and ideals are the right ones, then obviously you should want to be in power, so that you can make decisions. But what it is showing is actually that the opposition has sometimes even more power in effect of being in opposition. Like it's this like completely insane circus where it's just all about these power games. Okay.
Yeah. It's all about strategy, and if I place myself here, then I can kind of implement the type of veto, because it's very far away from looking at the question of what do we want for our nation as a nation, how can we get there and exist almost, and that's also, I think, one of the reasons why people are not interested in politics, because it's too much about the politicians and not enough about the country, about the people in the country. It's like, if you only consult with the people once in 4 years, how can it be about the people? It's not. It's about the politicians who every day make decisions. And that's, of course, very big weakness in our political system. Because, you know, I mean, you just have a bunch of people over there quarreling with each other, and apparently somewhere in there there's a person who's representing your interests, but you don't really know. And if you find out if they're now thinking this or if they're thinking that, it's only in 4 years that you can change it. So politics, I think that's why a lot of people have given up on politics, because there's very little, you know, relationship between the citizens, especially in an age like this, where at the moment I'm speaking live to a person in Denmark. We obviously have the technology to be able to bring a lot of people together in a short amount of time, and to put a vote on something. You know, I mean, we do it every day. We do it on Facebook. We like things. We click on things and we say, "This is good. This is good. This I want more of this." We do it. It's already being done, but it's kind of been hijacked by entertainment.
Yeah.
And you know, YouTube and Google, where, you know, hello people, we could use this for actually, you know, running our nation. Why don't we just do that? Why don't we just run the nation? I mean,
yeah, it would be so simple, but then also real politics is made into something that is so complicated that you wouldn't be able to understand it, especially here in Europe with the EU, which is like no one understands it, and you would have to read these like insane academic reports and everything to be able to, when also that part of it, that side of it, if it was represented and presented in a way that is considerate, you know, or that people were educated to be able to understand it. So it's like that three-part system of the citizen, the politician, and the actual politics is like in completely separate worlds, while we talk about it as though, you know, where people say, well, if you don't like it, you can just vote for someone else, as though it actually works like that, when in fact everyone knows that it doesn't. Okay, Maite, so it looks like Joanna has she's lost her internet connection. So from my perspective, we have exhausted everything there is to say for the moment about this series. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I'm satisfied.
Okay. So what I'm going to have to do to close the Hangout down is that I'm going to have to log into the account. So everyone, we will close down the Hangout, and we will see you. We will be back on Thursday. We'll have another DIP Hangout, and we will be back next Saturday with another movie Hangout, and I don't yet know what it's going to be about, so it will be a surprise. So stay tuned. We will be back on Thursday and on Saturday again. Oh, now she's coming back in. Okay. Hello?
Hey ladies, I'm so sorry. My internet went down, but I'm back. I'm really glad I'm back on time.
We actually just said that we were gonna finish, and we actually just said goodbye.
Oh, okay, but we're still live, right? Okay,
yes,
great.
We're still live. So you can have the honors.
Oh, yes. Okay, no, actually there was something, just one point. We still have a few viewers online. And one point that I'm not sure if you covered in the last 4 minutes that I was offline was just about the self-trust point, which I noticed as part of Borgen. That was a very important point within my own process of walking. It's about how women can empower ourselves, not only in politics, but in our daily lives, to actually trust ourselves and to take decisions, to go for those decisions. And from my perspective, that is something that I would like us to conclude with, and to also share our enthusiasm and how we've been walking this process in terms of supporting each other in the Desteni group, of actually becoming our own direction. And that is something that I noticed that for me, the character in the movie represented and assisted me in my own process. So would you like to add something to it and tell me how that the self-trust point assisted you, or perhaps you already have that within you, so you just saw a mirror in the series, or maybe even break it could learn with you a little bit more.
No, but you see that that's what's so cool about her. Like I said in the beginning, is that she's not this perfect heroine. She has these like insane breakdowns and she makes mistakes. But that point of returning to principle, she doesn't always do it, but it's quite ideally compared to how most of us are in our real lives. That point of returning to integrity, returning to principle, and how, you know, she comes back after she's been kicked out of politics and she lost, and then she bounces back and she comes back and she trusts herself. That's really cool. That's a cool example. So that's definitely something that I would like to take with me, which is also why, you know, if it was real, which is why she can be in such a position, because she realizes and understands her own potential, and she sees a principle of something that is, you know, this has to, you know, one of the times that she goes into politics, it's because she sees that the other guy, her opponent, is really an asshole. So she's like, I have to do this. You know, I have to show that there's a different way. So that's really cool. We can learn from that.
Cool. Matej, would you like to say any words before we end the session? Now for sure.
Well, for me, in terms of confident women, I'm kind of surrounded with women who know who they are and don't allow, you know, they don't hold back and they know what they stand for, and it doesn't matter whether they're a woman or not. Because who they are and what they live, and, you know, people will respect who they are and what they say and what they do and what they're capable of. So that is what I've been seeing in the women around me, and it becomes, you know, it's not this big thing really. When I was watching the show, it didn't even sink in that this is a female prime minister and it's something exceptional. It made complete sense that a woman should be in that position, because the women have this in them. This is not something strange or something that we should talk about or something that needs to be questioned. It's very much there. We have huge potential, and I mean, I see it every day in the women around me, and I don't see a reason why women should doubt that they can, in any way, be equal to a man, or even more effective than a man in certain things. It's, as any individual, you have strengths, and you have other things that you're not so good at. But to think that because I'm a woman, I can't do it, or I shouldn't trust myself, no, that's ridiculous. Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the proof that we need more people going into these positions of power and stand as the principles and showing that it is possible to change. And as in that first speech that the main character said, it is about a change of culture, a change of politics, a change of way of doing things. And also now with the DesteniIProcess input, it's also a change of how to deal with our own selves. And we're going to end now the session. My apologies for having been a bit away at some point during with the loss of my connection. Then I will add more links to the description so that the viewers can see all the items that we've been discussing from the EQUAF and from other links that will be supportive in your own process and to understand a little bit more about self-forgiveness and the tools of destiny. So thank you very much for watching and being with us tonight. Ladies, it was a pleasure to having you here, and I'll see you next time. And next Saturday we'll have Victor running the next movie night hangout. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi.